Dear participants, many thanks for joining us for this fourth webinar of the Paris Conference series on climate change and energy security for NATO nations. After a fourth webinar dedicated to the common understanding of global warming, climate change and energy security importance with a global consensus from the EU, UN and NATO. We then on the second webinar looked at dedicated areas at the neighborhood of NATO, being the Arctic, MENA and also Africa, in order to understand what are the challenges that these countries and these regions may face in the future, especially in terms of security risk. Then our third webinar was about the evolution of doctrines and strategies from the armed forces of NATO nations in order to cope with these issues, in order to tackle the security risk created by climate change, but also in order to strengthen energy security of the armed forces in Europe and abroad. Then now, as a concluding webinar, we are mostly focused on the technological challenges that are the consequence of all the elements we discussed in the previous webinars. It's a logical issue that we need to provide specific equipments, updated equipments that may help the armed forces both to deal with the new security risks that are created by the global warming, but also that are taking into account this need for enhanced energy security in order to provide new features, in order to provide better endurance for the armed forces, new capability for the armed forces, and to unleash them for the tether of fuel, as a famous US general said. And I want also to remind that there is no opposition between climate and energy efficiency on the one hand and military efficiency, operational efficiency on the other end. On the contrary, technological innovation will help to combine these two aspects in order to add the armed forces and the military to fulfill their missions and to be at the forefront of the security of NATO nations. But we have also to be aware that these changes in technology, that innovation in the field of climate change, in the field of energy security, is also deeply linked to other challenges, especially digitalization. So what we are facing now in the military technology is a global revolution that is making the armed forces to evolve toward new models, but with the necessity to fulfill the missions of security. So to address this issue of the technological advancement in energy security and climate change for the armed forces and NATO nations, we're having a large panel of experts, and I wish to thank you them again for being with us today and for sharing their insights and to start an important intellectual cooperation, important intellectual debate around all these elements. So before the panel, we also are very honored today to welcome Mr. David Van Weel, the Assistant Secretary General for Energy Security Challenges of NATO, as our keynote speaker. Mr. Van Weel, as the recent address by Secretary General Stoltenberg at the Leaders Summit on Climate underlines, NATO is taking the topic of climate change very seriously. It was also very interesting to look at the NATO 2013 works about this topic. Mr. Van Weel, before joining NATO in 2020, you were Foreign Policy and Defense Advisor for the Prime Minister of the Netherlands after a long career at the Netherlands MOD. You were first a military officer in the Navy, and you're having a broad expertise in various topics, being Afghanistan, Libya, NATO, nuclear policy, and so on. So you're having this very, very interesting background for us today in terms of being, first of all, a military officer, then a senior policy officer, senior civil servant at the Netherlands MOD, at the Netherlands Prime Minister, and now on NATO in this very specific position where you're in charge of the emerging security challenges. And I think that climate change is maybe one of the most important emerging security challenge for NATO. So Mr. Van Dijk, thank you again, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the kind introduction. And I'll try to hand you over to the experts as soon as I can. But thank you for the opportunity and the pleasure to address this conference today. So in the previous 3 events, you already recapped it. You looked at climate and energy from various angles. And today, you will be tackling perhaps the most difficult dimension of climate change, at least from a defense and security viewpoint, namely how to reconcile military security and environmental security. And I want to share with you a few reflections on this question. My first point, military security and climate security must not be played against each other. We need both. Yes, the military will remain a major consumer of fossil fuel for some time. But our security depends on a military that performs, even in the most demanding of circumstances. Thus, stigmatizing the military as a polluter misses the mark. To be blunt, it's great to win with an award for low emissions, but not if the price for this victory is losing the battle. But that being said, it should be equally clear that the military cannot be just an innocent bystander to the climate debate. The military is an integral part of our societies, and if these societies become increasingly convinced that climate change is the foremost threat to our existence, then the militaries must act seriously. And the same goes by definition for a major security institution like NATO. We must demonstrate that we have understood the concerns of our populations and that it will make a sensible contribution to meeting the challenge of climate change. And here comes the good news. It is entirely possible to square the circle of military effectiveness and environmental concerns. For example, we've demonstrated that in forward deployed bases, the consumption of diesel fuel can be reduced through the combination with wind and solar. Biofuels can reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and their production no longer competes with the production of food. And artificial intelligence can be applied to optimize the energy distributions in various military power systems. Such technologies contribute to reducing greenhouse gas emissions without compromising our military effectiveness. On the contrary, by lessening the burdens of conventional fuel supply, they increase operational flexibility. So what is the role of NATO in all of this? How can NATO foster these positive developments? Let me give you 3 pointers. First, we will soon start conducting regular NATO-wide climate change and security impact assessments. These assessments will analyze the impact of climate change on NATO's strategic assets, installations, missions, and operations. And we will also integrate climate change aspects into security risk and resilience assessments. We will leverage our science and technology programs, and Dr. Wells will speak more to that, to support research in this regard. Second, we will mainstream climate change into the entire NATO enterprise, be it resilience, preparedness, defense planning, capability delivery, innovation, training, exercises, and disaster response. We will also address the need to adapt our capabilities to the changing climate more prominently in our procurement practices and in our partnership with industry. Needless to say, this will include examining innovative, energy-efficient, and sustainable technologies. Third, we will seek to develop a mapping and analytical methodology of greenhouse gas emissions from military activities and installations. And this will help our allies to assess their own national emission assessments, and it will inform their investment decisions, as well as operational planning. Some allies may also use the results as a basis to formulate voluntary goals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from their militaries. These steps will make climate issues a firm part of NATO's agenda, from awareness to adaptation, to mitigation. They underline that NATO takes climate change seriously, namely as a phenomenon that will radically transform our strategic environment. Above all, however, they emphasize that NATO can adapt to climate change while also contributing to mitigation efforts. In short, they demonstrate that NATO can walk and chew gum at the same time. And as we're pushing ahead with NATO's climate and security agenda, one factor deserves particular attention: the exchange of best practices among allies, but also among allies and partner countries. Many nations, both within and outside of NATO, are pursuing interesting projects on energy efficiency. The European Union, too, has best practice to share. And NATO is a perfect platform for all of them to exchange their experiences. We need to use NATO to its fullest extent: its dialogue with industry, its science programs, and its centers of excellence. The more we can utilize NATO, the faster our progress will be. Ladies and gentlemen, a witty journalist recently mused about a new slogan for a more climate-conscious NATO: out of carbon or out of business. Well, that might have been a little premature, but squaring the circle of climate concerns and military effectiveness will be a long and difficult struggle. But the stage is set, and NATO of the future will have forces that are adapted to perform under changing climatic conditions. And at the same time, these forces will have a smaller environmental footprint. This is the win-win outcome we are seeking, for our military security and for our climate security. Thank you, and I wish you a great discussion in the panel.
Thank you very much for this very inspiring address. What I'm very interested in your speech was the exchange of best practices inside NATO and outside NATO, and that's very, very interesting because climate change is a global issue. It's a security issue, but it's not only a security issue, and it's an issue that is all over the world. It has no borders. Climate is a global common, and that will be very interesting to see how NATO will manage to combine this global cooperation with partners, but also to keep some elements, I think, inside NATO, because NATO remains a military alliance with specific members and that are not, for example, willing to share some elements. That it will be very, very interesting. And thank you again for this very interesting and inspiring address. Now we are going to open our panel of experts regarding these questions on technological investment for the armed forces. And please do not hesitate to post questions for our panelists that will be addressed after the presentation during the Q&A session. At the bottom of your screen, you're having a dedicated space embedded in Zoom for the Q&A, so do not hesitate to pose a question there. And just after the last presentation, when we'll open the Q&A session, I will ask your questions. So many thanks. For the first presentation, I'm glad to welcome Dr. Bryan Wells. So, Dr. Wells, you're NATO Chief Scientist since 2019, and as NATO Chief Scientist, you're having multiple roles. First of all, you're Chair of NATO Science and Technology Board, so you're Senior Scientific Advisor to NATO leadership, and you're also the leader, of course, of the Office of Chief Scientist. Before joining NATO, you were the UK MOD Head of Science and Technology Policy, Strategic Research and Technology Program, and also at the same time, you were having a specific role in partnership with the EDA because you were also chair of the EDA Research and Technology Steering Board. So, Dr. Wells, thank you for being with us, and the floor is yours.
Nicolas, thank you very much indeed. I will add comments to what David van Weel has already said. I see my role very much in providing the scientific advice to policy leaders such as David and the military leadership on precisely this squaring the circle of maintaining military effectiveness and also environmental concerns. So I will start off by reminding colleagues here that the NATO Secretary General made clear, including in his speech to the Leadership Climate Change Conference, that NATO's approach, as David has said, is based on 3 pillars. Understanding the security implications of climate change, that's the first. The second is adapting to climate change. And the third is mitigating the security implications of climate change. And the Secretary General's vision is that NATO should set the gold standard in these areas, in these 3 areas of the security implications of climate change. And I'd like to set out today why I believe that science has a vital role to play in all 3 of these pillars: understand, adapt, and mitigate. And the technical advances can make game-changing impacts in all 3 of these pillars, I will argue. But before setting out the way in which science can support these 3 pillars, I want to say a few words about NATO's own science and technology organization. There are 2 elements that I want to highlight. The first is NATO's own laboratory, the Centre for Maritime Research and Experimentation, that is based at La Spezia in Italy. This does maritime research. It has 2 research vessels dedicated to this task. One of them is ice capable, which makes it ideal for work in the Arctic. And NATO's Centre for Maritime Research and Experimentation already does climate change work, and I'll come into some of the details later. The second body that I want to highlight is NATO's network of scientists around the globe. We have about 6,000 scientists in NATO allies and also in very many partner countries who work together to collaborate very broadly on defence, science and technology. And this work is funded directly by the nations. At any one time, we have about 300 projects underway with a total value of around 300 million euros per year. The scientists come from government, from academia and from industry, from small and medium enterprises and also innovation hubs. So a lot of the science that is already being done by this network is of direct support to the 3 pillars of understand, adapt and mitigate to the security implications of climate change. And I want to take now each of these 3 pillars and address how technology is already contributing to these NATO pillars. Looking first at the task of understanding climate change, the Secretary General is clear that NATO must understand and anticipate the impact of climate change on our security. And that means investing in research and sharing our research and data and analysis. In the maritime field, I've already mentioned the Centre for Maritime Research and Experimentation already does this, and it uses cutting-edge technology in doing this. Over the last 2 years, the Centre has published over 20 papers in peer-reviewed scientific journals, covering issues such as water circulation in the Arctic, underwater acoustic networks in the Arctic, and in the Adriatic, maritime waves, sea waves under severe and extreme climatic conditions. And as we speak, NATO's research vessel is sailing into the Arctic with a specially made autonomous environmental monitoring unit that will be doing environmental monitoring in the Arctic region. Technology developments undoubtedly help here. Maritime environmental monitoring generates a huge amount of data. So the new technologies that allow us to handle big data the use of artificial intelligence helps, the use of autonomy helps. So we are already contributing as NATO to understanding climate change. In the second area, the challenge of adapting to new security environments caused by climate change, new technologies play a very considerable role. NATO is increasingly called on to respond to natural disasters, and the equipment that the military have to do this must be right for the task. Let me just give you an example of some recent work that we've done. In February of this year, NATO's Science and Technology Organization ran an extremely extensive tabletop exercise on the use of new technologies in 4 illustrative NATO scenarios. And one of those was a humanitarian disaster. We had very wide participation across NATO, across allies and partners, and the EU military staff as well. I'm looking forward to briefing the EDA on the details of this tabletop. That is something that I have recently discussed with the chief executive of the EDA. So this was an ideal way of assessing the impact of new technologies against credible futures for NATO operations. And unsurprisingly, we were able to dig very deeply into how new technologies can help NATO in humanitarian operations. It's well known amongst the scientists that we rarely see a single new technology make a game-changing difference. It's generally combinations of new technologies, and we were able to test that very succinctly, very accurately. So we were looking, for example, at autonomy as a means to gain entry into areas that are physically difficult. If there have been earth collapses due to rainwater or whatever, we can increasingly use autonomous systems to help us there. New technologies will help with geographic information. It will help us analyze geographic information more effectively than in the past. Space-based sensors will be increasingly important, as will the use of sensors that are wearable by members of the armed forces. We found some unexpected conclusions as well, one of which was that the increasing use of new technologies at the level of the individual member of an operation, such as artificial intelligence, wearable sensors, analytic big data, for example, they all use power. So we need to be able to generate power in theatre in a green way. And the very power consumption of new technologies is something that must not be underestimated. So again, we're on the task, particularly the application of novel materials in conservation of power is an area. The other area that we hadn't anticipated but is important is the use of new technologies to generate drinkable water, for example. Again, very important in humanitarian operations. So again, this points the way to the sorts of areas that we will be looking at in the future to build on the contributions that we have already made. And finally, in terms of mitigating the effects of climate change, as David has already mentioned, we need to reduce our dependence and use of fossil fuels. We need to increase our use of biofuels or synthetic fuels. We're already doing research in that. And we need to make sure that we can use renewable energy sources in our forward operating bases, for example. But there are other things that we are doing. For example, looking at improvements in aerodynamic design, principally in aircraft, but the principles are applicable elsewhere in Belgium, we have just down the road from Brussels, Von Karman Institute for Fluid Dynamics, which works with a number of allies on these very important aerodynamic design issues. So drawing to a conclusion, the NATO summit in the middle of June next month and the accompanying NATO 2030 agenda has both climate change on its agenda, but also maintaining the technological edge. And I believe that both of these support each other. We can contribute to understanding, mitigating, and adapting to climate change and maintain our technological edge. They're in a sense two sides of the same coin. So NATO's own laboratory, the Centre for Maritime Research and Experimentation, and the collaborative programme of work by NATO allies and partners are involved in supporting the three pillars of NATO's climate change agenda and also in maintaining NATO's technological edge. These are big challenges. I don't pretend that they are big challenges, but I am optimistic that NATO has collectively the academic power to meet the challenges. We need to remember that the top 18 universities in the globe are on the soil of NATO allies. The excellence of scientists can place NATO at a position of strength in tackling climate change and maintenance of the technological edge. I'm not in any way complacent as NATO chief scientist of the scale of these challenges, but I do argue that we're approaching them from a position of strength. So, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Walls, for this intervention. Excuse me. I think that is such an interesting and it's such an important human wealth you're having with this potential of collaboration, this scientific network. It's a very strategic asset for you, but it's also, I think, a major challenge in terms of information sharing, in terms of also protecting the data, because as you mentioned, a technological innovation for the armed forces will also be at the forefront for the global competition in the 21st century. So sharing the data, but yet also protecting the data on these new technologies will be a very important challenge for NATO and for all other military organization and armed forces. Speaking about international organization, I'm turning to Dr. Panagiotis Kikiras, the head of Unit Technology and Innovation at the European Defence Agency. Dr. Kikiras is a specialist in computer and network engineering with an emphasis on different areas such as IoT, cyber defense, and C4ISR system, for example. Is having an impressive background in both national and military administration, but also in academia, being the adjunct associate professor at the Department of Computer Science at the University of Thessaly. I think you're also founder of this Department of Computer Science. So, Dr. Kikiras, many thanks for being with us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm just sharing. Please confirm that you can see my presentation.
We can see it.
Okay, thank you. It's a pleasure sharing some initial thoughts with all of you today. I would like to emphasize that within EDA, we have been dealing with aspects related to green forces and to the environment as early as from 2012. Nevertheless, let's go through a little bit on understanding our role in the ecosystem and see how the agency is then is organizing ourselves in order to support the member states in dealing with energy and environment issues. From what we are doing and what we have been doing since 2004 that we have been established, I think that the elements that we are today discussing as are part of our three key roles. And I think the third one, to act as a military interface, is key for this activity, because what we are trying to do is to convey to other parts of European Commission responsible for the policies on environment and on energy, the needs and the specificities of defense forces, as very well described before by the two speakers. On top of that, of course, what we are trying to do is to create an environment where cooperation between different member states can flourish in order to develop the technologies that are needed in order to fill in the gaps identified in the capability development plan agreed at the level of ministers of defense. To do so, we have a number of tools in place. I'm not going to go into this discussion, but you will see later on how all these are fitting into what we are doing in the area of the energy and environment. So as I said, it's not new, the need to develop technologies related to the energy. And there are different aspects when you are seeing energy and environment in terms of technologies and evolutions that are needed. You can see it from the purely operational, and I mean by operational, covering both platforms and systems, but also operations planning per se, and I'm referring to lines of communication and logistics lines to transform and the needed fuels to the remote bases around the globe, wherever we have forces. But also the technologies that are needed to increase efficiency and to develop the next generation weapon systems, platforms, but also camps. What is new, and I think this has also been highlighted from NATO perspective, what is new in EU part of the world is that there is a clear urgency and a clear mandate from the Council for getting the agenda on energy and environment higher in the EU global strategy, taking into account the complications that these two factors can have to security and defense. So, and this is not only for CSDP missions, but in all aspects of operations of armed forces, also when they are in bases, their bases in Europe. And this is also needs to be seen as part of the EU Green Deal policy and strategies. So in 2019, we had the first clear tasking and reference, which then led in 2020, June 2020, when the Council has been tasking different services of commissions and the EDA to set up a defense climate change and defense roadmap. And to do so, you will be soon see the fruits of this activity. So the roadmap is something that is already happening. A lot of services are working in developing this roadmap. And for us in the agency, we are contributing in three areas of that roadmap: on the operational dimension, on the capability development, and on fostering different partnerships. To do so, we have some distinct structures within the agency. We have the Energy and Environment Working Group, which is a long-standing working group within the agency, which will be soon hopefully become a full operating capability technology group, as we have in all other technological areas that are relevant to defense. So the working group has representatives from member states, from MODs, from research centers, from academia, and soon we will have also industry participating in the activities of this group. The key work of this working group is to support considerations regarding to energy and environmental risks, to identify gaps and to identify and develop technologies that can fill in those gaps. On top of that, and as part of EU-funded activity, we have the Consultation Forum for Sustainable Energy in the Defense and Security sector, which is now in the third version of this, let's say, big project, which is mainly focusing on helping the ministries of defense moving towards green, resilient, and efficient energy models in all areas of activities. I will start first with some more information on the consultation forum. We have the participation in this forum of all EDA and the EU members, plus Norway, Switzerland, and Serbia that are following the activities of this working group. The primary focus of this forum, which has more than 150 members, we are always happy to say that we might have the biggest community in defense on this domain on energy resilience, efficiency. And the focus is on energy legislation, trying to understand the impact of different directives that Commission is forwarding to member states on the defense, and to share best practices, expertise, and knowledge, to develop projects that if applied, if developed, they will contribute to the different parts of these legislations in order to meet the targets for green Europe. We are producing guidance in support of member states to apply sustainable energy models, and we are supporting by providing a number of inputs to the overall effort of the European Green Deal implementation. The current funding of this project is under Horizon 2020, and the budget that this project has is at the level of 3 million euros. The consultation forum has the working groups that you can see on the slide. Each of these working group is having distinct targets and is corresponding to one of the directives of the green energy package of European Commission. And we have one transversal working group that is supporting all the other groups, first of all in policy and management, acting as an observatory in order to identify issues related to skills, human factors, training, awareness, support in developing action plans. We have a dedicated technology research and innovation hub where we are discussing about technologies on energy management of networks, the impact of cyber to critical energy infrastructures, the impact of AI in efficiency of buildings or on better management of renewable energy resources, microgrids, and all the other technologies that are can be applied to a base, for instance, a smart camp. And finally, we have also the opportunity to support member states to mature energy projects and to help them to develop and to identify funding by utilizing one of the available European Commission funding instruments. For the coming years, we see that the consultation forum will have a big number of activities. You can see those activities in these domains and the relationship of the activities that we've seen before with the different strategies and policies of European Commission that we are contributing. There is a quite interesting activity that we are going to engage in starting from next year. It's part of the EU offshore strategy, and what we will try to do along with DG Energy is to identify the impact of offshore energy creation to defense applications, trying to mitigate some of the problems that probably offshore power generation can create to activities related, for instance, to surveillance of airspace. On top of that, the consultation forum has a major role in contributing to the EU's climate change and defense roadmap. I'm not going to read all these activities, but we are trying to identify all those activities that needs to be planned in the coming years in order to support the transition of defense forces to a greener model of operation, both in when they are in base, but also in operations. The other pillar of our activity, as I said, is the Energy and Environment Working Group, which was created to establish a common approach to energy and environment issues within the EU Armed Forces. Its mission is to provide advice and to deliver tangible outcomes, always in favor of the participating member states to EDA in the four domains that you can see on the slide: training, education, and knowledge, data collection and analysis, energy efficiency and sustainability, and alternative energy sources. And I was this morning opening a big activity that we are starting on data collection and analysis. This is a critical and strategic activity because we are trying to formalize, similar with what NATO announced on the measuring the emissions. We are following a different approach. We are trying to identify how and where, and we are spending, consuming energy with our forces. In terms of technologies, as I said on one of my previous slides, there is a quite coherent and comprehensive tool chain developed currently at the EU, aiming at increasing the collaboration between member states in order to develop the agreed European capabilities at the Capability Development Plan. The contribution of our Energy and Environment Working Group to all these activities is covering both the technology push and the capability pull, trying to link the capability with the technology domains by identifying and using the technology building blocks, a set of technologies identified as part of the overarching strategic research agenda and prioritized by the member states. You can see the technology building blocks that we are currently working on. So alternative fuels and drive propulsion systems, energy storage, all different aspects on energy storage, engine and power distribution efficiency technologies, energy management technologies, solar energy generation, militarization of environmental technologies, especially in water and wastewater treatment, technologies for energy harvesting and scavenging, renewables, mainly wind energy, hydrogen energy as well, and hydrogenization of different operational and non-operational activities, energy and environment technology systems integration and training, and as a big concept, trying to utilize environmental technologies from energy, energy from waste, or waste to energy technology. So these are the key elements that we are working. To do so, we are trying to identify better. That's why we're using a number of tools. One of these tools are the overarching strategic research agenda technology foresight exercises, where by utilizing knowledge from our experts, we are trying to see, foresee what is going to happen in the future. To this regard, earlier this year, we had a meeting with 170 experts from EU organizations and different entities, including RTOs and academia. We had tried to foresee the future 2035 and beyond, and in 3 different categories related to the topic that we are discussing today: energy generation, energy management and distribution, and energy storage. And recently we had received very interesting results, but I will share some aspects of them. For instance, in the area of hydrogen fuel cells, we identified that miniaturized fuel cells for power generation would be a good way to pursue further development in these hydrogen fuel areas, in order to apply them in different scenarios. For instance, wearable power systems for soldiers, light-duty land platforms, and any kind of unmanned systems. To show you how dense is this analysis, you can see, for instance, on this same topic, the H2 fuel cells, an example of the level of dense and deep information that we had find. So, for instance, you see that there are in land platforms that current technology on fuel cells is not suitable because of the high level of vibration caused by trucks, by military trucks. So they cannot be immediately used on defense. Therefore, we will need to do something to further develop this technology. So I would like to close at this point. I know I have been far more than the time that I was supposed to, but I think it was a good opportunity for you to understand the overall framework and the different pillars and the different targets and objectives that we have at the European Defence Agency. We are committed, and our member states are committed in supporting all and adopting all EU strategies that are in place. We are committed to collaborating with other institutions like Nato, and Bryan knows that we have a very good collaboration and open collaboration also on this domain. And we are looking forward to further discuss today and to exchange some of our learnings during the Q&A part of this conference. So thank you again, and back to you.
Thank you, Panagiotis, for giving us this very huge amount of information, and being myself a moderator of the Working Group 3 in the Consultation Forum, I can also confirm that member states are very much involved in this process. To highlight your presentation, one point was very interesting, because there is difference very important also between NATO and the EU, is that NATO is primarily a military alliance, whether EU is not primarily a military alliance. And it's to see that the EDA's work are also very transversal, because the climate change defense roadmap, for example, is not only a work of a military dedicated organization just like EDA, but also involving European External Action Service, involving DG Ener, involving DG Climate. So it's a very broad perspective, and that's a very important, very interesting point, to have these transversal elements in Europe. Now to jump from the regional and international organization to the level of state, we'll have a presentation by Lt-Col Pasquale Porcelli from the Italian MOD. So Pasquale, you're an Air Force officer, yet you also graduated as a civil engineer, having a post-degree master's in both airport engineering, business management, leadership, analysis, and of course, energy efficiency. Since 2018, you're a certified energy manager, also with this operational vision of the energy management for the armed forces. And for 1 year now, you're the energy security section head of the cabinet of the Italian MOD, so having also a very important role in terms of military policy for the Italian armed forces. So Pasquale, the floor is yours. Thank you. Oh, you're still muted.
Okay, thank you. Perfect. Distinguished guests and colleagues, I am Lieutenant Colonel Porcelli Pasquale, and I'm Energy Security Section Head of Energy. Let me express my pleasure and my deep honor to be here today. Anyway, let's perfect. Okay, and let's move to the presentation. This is the agenda that consists in 3 focal points. I'll describe Italian MOD main activities, our conceptual approach, and at the end I'll represent some project in progress. I'm representative to ITA Task Force IEA, is the real estate development, energy efficiency, and environmental sustainability. To address energy issues in an effective and systematic way, the Minister of Defense set up this task force. It was done paying attention to the characteristic of the defense and military world related to the operational aspect. In this slide is represented the task force organizational chart. The chief, the director is a general who reports directly to the Minister of Defense. The task force consists in 2 big areas of responsibility. One as the duty of infrastructure, and the other the energy. My section is in the energy and environmental aspect area. Anyway, I would like now just to highlight only some premises that we consider like the starting point from which our institutional task, the lack of natural resources, need to have an adequate level of national defense, both national defense and international security, the requirement of an adequate governance and technological levels inspired to the maximum criteria of efficiency and the cheapness, and the urgency of promoting the culture of participation in public institution and academic industrial sector. Then we work by implementing the so-called sponge effect. We investigate nationally and internationally energy and environmental aspect and solution, and we try to define and identify the most appropriate solution for our sector in response to the needs and the commitments related to the specific defense sector. And then we propose these solutions to the armed forces, gaining the lesson learned from by them. And how we are operating? We are operating considering the SEN, the national energy strategy, and the European and the worldwide medium long-term objective. So the Minister of Defense issued two pillars for us. The guideline for defense energy strategy and the policy and planning document for energy strategy in defense sector. But now let's see the conceptual aspect and the method we tried to implement. At the beginning, the challenging question we asked ourselves were, do we want to meet the challenges on energy, environmental issues, and cyber hybrid threats? Do we want the defense sector to be excellent in the public administration and contribute to achieve the national targets? And are we ready for changing? The answers to this question are obvious, but the path to gain results is not so easy. At the beginning, the challenging question we began to answer our question approaching an holistic and comprehensive approach and paying attention to efficiency as an energy capability and defense. We began to answer our question above all through the definition of a method. For example, a first step for us is a new governance system. We are implementing a new net of a command and control system based on an energy portal support. This is not only a data collection center, but also a management instrument for the decision maker, especially because it includes an artificial intelligence. Our level of ambition concerns the opportunity to create a network control and management system that, like a neural system and human neural system, allows to have total management. So, based on smart city paradigms, we propose to define a smart military district to manage energy, water, waste, and cyber aspects. Here, a vision of our most advanced model, the realization of an aggregated system of energy islands that assemble a safe energy archipelago. On this slide, the concept of security is also extended to cyber aspects and also concern deployable structure. From the point of view of aforementioned binomial energy security, cyber security, the defense can play a crucial role also in support of the others, the citizens, the non-military world, preparing its own system of strategic critical infrastructures for dual use, useful for national energy resiliency. In fact, this approach aims, inter alia, to ensure a dual use of this capacity, so that the defense is considered a real integrated system, connected at several levels, such as to allow the country to increase its collective security against all those threats and calamitous events that can disrupt the regular life of a citizen. At the same time, the impact on the environment could be minimized. Therefore, Smart Military District constitutes a platform on which to simultaneously combine an aspect of energy management and security management. This slide shows the activities related to each sector that allow to have an integrated management also by using artificial intelligence. This is our response to minimize the impact on the environment and to delay or stop the climate changes. And now the last point, the last focal point of my presentation. Let's start now to see the part concerning exemplary project. Now, forgetting some action made in order to promote and facilitate, for example, cost reduction of supply, the task force operate making a question: which futures will have our pilot projects to be exemplary? First of all, implementing this project in military training school means, according to us, transferring knowledge to energy-related topics to commanders of tomorrow. Secondly, we want to show that it's possible to carry out important energetic renovations even in protected buildings because they belong to the historical heritage. Third point, this project stands out in high energy saving level with values up to 50%. Moreover, the vocation is strongly dual use because many of these infrastructure are also used by people outside the defense. Finally, we want these projects to bring a better life even outside the military compendium, which well interacts with the surrounding territory. The first exemplary project that we refer is the Ducal Palace in Modena that hosts the military academy of Italian Army and Carabinieri. This project consists in a deep energy renovation with an estimate cost of 13 million euros using an energy performance contract. This project is co-financed by European Energy Fund and national funds with hard annual saving targets, with an important collaboration of university too, like public stakeholders, and EESS like private helper. In the picture, you can see the historical, artistic, and volumetric importance of the building. A second exemplary project that I want to present to you is the energy efficiency of the only one Italian military polyclinic, currently focal medical point for Italian mission abroad, and built in the oldest historical center in Rome. This project is the first step of a comprehensive project that, together with the station of a smart sanitary district, typical example of what we mean as dual use. These are the main characteristics of the project we are managing. We are doing a deep energy renovation here too. with an estimated cost of 8 million euro, using the energy performance contract financed by national funds. Again, with the hard annual saving target, with the collaboration of Enea. Enea is an Italian agency for new technology, energy and sustainability economic development. The picture show you how much distant we are from Colosseo. Last but not the least is the smart and efficiency military district we want to realize on Castro Pretorio, another historical site, another historical district of Rome, where the Praetorian soldiers a few years ago organized their wars. Our goal is to connect numerous military sites in the area, giving the same unique resilience characteristics. Our goal is to create an intelligent and efficient district of the city with the collaboration of important Italian and local stakeholders. In fact, there are the many characteristics of the project. We are talking of a project of 45 million euro, using again an energy performance contract financed by international and national funds, with hard annual saving, with the collaboration of university. In fact, the task force, the role of task force is inter alia signs a bilateral agreement on behalf of the Minister of Defense with public entities such as university or with the mayor of Rome, for example, and or government-owned company that have like a CEO, for example, a minister, or the mayor, or the mayor, for example. Anyway, we don't disdain to bind the company through the energy performance contract too. Thank you for your kind attention, and I would like to greet everyone now to avoid interrupting eventually other speakers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pasquale. It was very interesting also to have this point highlighted of the historical buildings and the need to take them into account, especially in Italy, but not also, I think, in France, in Spain, and in a very large number of European countries with this specific attention. One point that was very, very interesting in your presentation was this idea of total management with this analogy of the neural system. I think it's very specific to the Italian strategy, but it maybe also could be a good example for other countries. So thank you again. Now we are listening to Dr. Pınar İpek, Associate Professor at the Department of Political Science and International Relations of TOB, I don't know if I pronounce well, TOB University of Economics and Technology in Ankara. Dr. İpek works are focused on energy security, EU energy policy, Eastern Mediterranean energy resources, oil and gas geopolitics in Central Asia and the Middle East, without forgetting to mention, of course, Turkey's energy issues. So, Dr. İpek, the floor is yours.
I would like to thank for all the dedicated work that the officers have put together to organize this great event. I'm honored to be here. So today, let me share my slides. Today I will tackle the question that you see on the panel. So to start with, I may repeat some of the already mentioned presentations in the previous panels, so I'm sorry for that, but I have to put it in a context. So the work of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is the most cited scientific base for our assessments about global warming of the components of the climate system. And we know that all NATO countries are also IPCC members, the panel, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So the measurements of the anthropogenic increase in the concentration of greenhouse gases over the past 200 years indicate significant global warming of the components of the climate system over the several decades. And greenhouse gases are largely driven by fossil fuels use in industry and in electricity production. Greenhouse gas concentrations will not fall rapidly despite all political efforts. Further, thawing of permafrost and consequent methane release, which may also contribute to global warming, are not yet included in the IPCC climate models. So, yeah, I think now I can, it's better if I use this way. As you see here, World Economic Forum's Global Risks Report 2021 ranks extreme weather, climate action failure, and human environmental damage as the top 3 risks in terms of the likelihood. The report, as you may know, is based on annual global risks perception survey completed by over 650 members of the global World Economic Forum, diverse leadership communities. On the other hand, when you look at the likelihood of these risks, you see climate action failure ranks number 2 in terms of the impact. Indeed, ahead of the weapons of mass destruction, which is a conventional security threat. So in short, extreme weather and climate action failure are therefore important for today, for my presentation. And the question that was given to me, why national initiators in tackling climate change and enhancing energy security should be the NATO's concern. Well, climate change and extreme weather have significant military implications for NATO on the tactical, operational, and military strategic level. I'm not by any means a military expert, and the previous panels actually highlighted all the good points about that. And we know that in March 2021, NATO foreign ministers approved a specific agenda on climate change and security. So my presentation today will focus on destabilizing physical shocks and aggravated tensions driven by climate change and extreme weather in the near term for operational level of NATO attacks, given the need for enhancing energy security of the alliance. Even at scenarios of low warming, right, because there are different scenarios, each region of the world will face severe risks to energy security at national and regional levels in the next 3 decades. In 2018, the IPCC issued a special report on global warming. So this report actually clarified the impacts associated with different climate change trajectories, especially by mapping the differences that could be expected between 2 warming scenarios. One is the 1.5 Celsius scenario, and the other one is the 2 Celsius scenario. So the results of this 2018 report show that low warming scenarios are becoming harder to avoid. Within this framework, I focus on a near-term scenario, meaning 1 to 2 Celsius warming, between now until mid-century, in other words, 2050, that pose significant threats to energy security in light of the 4 criteria for analysis. And these criteria are sustainability, accessibility in terms of infrastructure, reliability in terms of political, social stability in energy exporter, energy supplier countries, and affordability in terms of affordable energy prices. While sustainability through energy transition from fossil fuels to increasing use of renewable energy supply sources in energy security is obvious to mitigate the extreme weather and climate change risk. Destabilizing physical shocks and aggravated social tensions driven by climate change and extreme weather are particular concern for accessibility and reliability criteria in energy security respectively. In short, more intense and frequent climate shocks or extreme weather conditions could destabilize areas already vulnerable for NATO members' energy security. My focus on destabilizing physical shocks and aggravated social tensions driven by climate change and extreme weather in the near term for operational level of NATO tasks are already supported by previous presentations in the earlier panels of this conference. For example, another report and the key findings that you see also in the slide, the February 2000 report by the Center for Climate and Security, an Institute of Council on Strategic Risks in Washington, D.C. This report presented security threat assessments of global climate change for different regions. And especially under the near-term scenario, what we see in this map is all regions will experience high levels of climate security threats. Among all regions, particular regions or political spaces are important to understand the nexus between the climate change induced security threats and risks for energy security. Because, as I mentioned, destabilizing physical shocks and aggravated social tensions driven by climate change and extreme weather are particular concern for accessibility and reliability criteria in energy security. Now, very quickly, just to refresh already, I think, known facts about changing global energy demand. Yes, we are in an energy transition phase, so we have seen the increasing role of renewables and to an extent gas. And what we see here is also developing countries actually are the major demanding centers for different energy supply sources. Further, when we look at the current position of energy supply by source, unfortunately, at the moment, at the given scenario, we don't see much escape from fossil fuels yet. As you see, oil is declined, but unfortunately, coal, which contributes negatively to climate change and extreme weather consequences, has increased because it is a reliable domestic supply source. And of course, we see a growing role of renewables and some significant considerable increase in natural gas. So when we look at these physical shocks separately and how they relate to energy security, number one, we see food, water, and resource stress that would intensify already tense resource, political, and territorial competition. In Middle East and North Africa region, increased social grievances due to food, water, and resource stress are particular concern for the reliability criteria in energy security because of the relationship between the petrostates and interstate conflicts. Well, I am also a professor in international relations and international political economy. So in our research in the international relations literature, research-driven literature, there are already well-known findings that indicate a revolutionary government in a petrostate is more likely to enhance interstate conflict or launch a militarized interstate dispute. But there is no statistically significant relationship between regime type, like autocratic regime or a democratic regime, and international conflict when we look at the state level. Thus, regime change and regime formation are important variables for us to explain the reasons for interstate conflict. And these regime change and regime formation, my point, can be on the agenda because of these food, water, and resource stress in energy exporting countries. Further, the second disrupting physical shock can be extreme weather, resulting in, as we all know, in natural disasters, including heat waves, drought, flooding, wildfires, and storms. So another important trend in energy security in the world is electrification, meaning increasing demand for electricity, a particular supply, but you have to find an energy supply to produce electricity, right? So this brings the vulnerability of physical energy infrastructure to extreme weather. And as we know, a most recent example is what the extreme weather conditions has done to Texas power system in United States, the breakdown of the power system. Another example for NATO operational level can be the challenge for air operations, like overheating of military aircraft and air-based installations, which will increase logistical efforts and need higher energy consumption. Or because of, again, extreme weather, warmer waters, maritime operations can be expected. And indeed, we see some incidents where increased salinity in the Gulf of Aden has caused turbines on frigates to fail. In short, vulnerability of energy distribution systems and higher demand for electricity for cooling or heat due to extreme weather conditions is a challenge. The third physical disruption, physical shock, can be a sea level rise. And a breakdown in fossil fuel maritime transportation, together with extreme weather conditions, may put some pressure on what you see on this map, what we call also as choke points, in other words, major straits that are important for current crude oil and petroleum liquids transportation, as well as LNG transportation, liquefied natural gas. So you have seen actually the Middle East MENA region is the center because of large volumes of crude oil and petroleum transported in terms of million barrels per day. This is daily. A sea level rise may impact low-lying countries in the MENA region, including Egypt, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, and United Arab Emirates. Or given the Bab el-Mandeb, the Horn of Africa in Djibouti is threatened by rising sea levels, high temperatures, and extreme weather disasters. What we don't see in this map is a new road that might be opened for maritime transportation, the Arctic Sea. The scientists agree that the strongest temperature change is forecasted for the Arctic with an increase of more than 10 degrees. So NATO operational supply routes and world trade transport routes that rely on these coastal roads, maritime roads, are particularly vulnerable to rise of sea levels and extreme weathers. Thus, climate change driven sea level rise and extreme weather conditions also affect NATO operations as well as maritime economy in the world trade. And the second dimension that I would like to highlight is aggravated social tensions, again driven by climate change. Majority of highly fragile states in the world today also face high climate risks. These are predominantly in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East that have either high and growing energy demand centers for energy, and indeed some of these regions are also major fossil fuel producers and exporters. In the Middle East, dangerous levels of temperature rise, drought, dwindling water supplies that intensify already tense resource, political, and territorial competition, particularly in sub-Saharan and Eastern Africa, with histories of violent conflict. These climate effects push more populations into an increasingly dense cities of already fragile states. So we may see a potential for radicalization and conflict escalating. Increased social grievances can have implications for intrastate, in other words, within state conflict, in particularly petrostates or fossil fuel exporters, given the ongoing energy transition and ongoing dependency on fossil fuels. So what you can see here is a list of countries that are actually particularly vulnerable because their economy is largely relying on fossil fuel rents. Fossil fuel rents are the difference between cost of production and market price of fossil fuels. And as we know, indeed, before the pandemic, lower world crude oil prices highlight the vulnerability of these petrostates economies during energy transformation, because fossil fuel rents are important to finance socio-economic development and economic diversification in these countries. So actually what you see in this graph is already fiscal restraints in selected oil exporters have implications for their political stability given their rentier economies. So these sharp declines in their fiscal budgets undermine the political legitimacy of some authoritarian governments in these countries. And indeed, again, in international relations literature, there is a large research and findings that shows us the relationship between how petrostates cannot achieve to be democratic. In other words, what we know commonly as oil curves. So what I'm trying to highlight is actually declining oil prices will put further pressure on these authoritarian governments, and what they can achieve till this time by rents or by oil rents supporting less taxation, large spending, and preventing opposition group formation, and using again petrodollars, petro revenues for repression effect on emerging opposition groups, democratization efforts, and so on, may be further undermined by the low price environment. And through the energy transition, actually what we see in different scenarios, no matter the current scenario or a better scenario that we move faster to a renewable, sustainable development scenario, the demand for gas and oil is declining. And you can see in $1 trillion overall how much these revenues would be lost for these countries. That brings us to the challenge that is indeed, as you can see in this graph, some countries are more vulnerable because of their highest dependence on oil rents and low resilience and or high levels of youth unemployment. For example, as you could see in the upper corner of the figure, Libya, Angola, Nigeria, Iraq, right? And unfolding problems of state building and regime formation in the historical context of the Middle East, monarchies of the Gulf countries, and fiscal restraints due to, as I just mentioned, declining fossil fuel rents. And lastly, the weakening autonomy of these leaders, given the increasing risks for domestic punishment. This was controlled previously in the high price environment. To conclude, energy transition to renewables and energy transformation. So energy transition is simply the transition from fossil fuels to a sustainable energy future driven by renewables, whereas energy transformation indicates the larger social, political, environmental transformation of people, societies, states, and regions. So this energy transition to renewables and energy transformation will reshape the geopolitics of energy security, driven by extreme weather and climate change failure, as I focused in my presentation, especially in the near term at low warming scenario. So please pay attention, low warming scenario. So that means obviously in a higher warming scenario and in the longer term, these risks would be tripled or increased significantly. Policymakers in developing countries, NATO energy stakeholders, international military staff for defense logistics, allied command operations, center of excellence like organizer of this event, NATO energy security for excellence. So all these policymakers, in short, should consider changing dynamics between energy exporter and importers during energy transition, new geographies of energy trade. What I mean by shift from global markets to regional grids. Why? Because the more we move away from fossil fuels to renewable energies, the global commodities are traded in these global markets like oil or LNG, whereas electrification would require regional trade and reliance on regional grids. Further, actually, I should share my slides once again.
Please, if you can conclude.
Yes, just one more minute, and then definitely I will conclude. Yeah. Yes. Here, yeah, everybody can see. Yeah. Another major point indeed just highlighted by the recent report by International Energy Agency in terms of new geographies of energy trade is the geographic concentration of energy transition minerals. As you can see here, right, there are critical minerals that are increasingly needed for clean energy technologies, and unfortunately, there would be a higher demand for these significantly increase in these critical minerals. And as I said, unfortunately, these critical minerals are concentrated more than oil and natural gas. My conclusion is, again, we have to pay attention to the changing dynamics between energy exporters and importers and these new geographies of energy trade. Thank you for your time and attention.
Teşekkürler, Dr. İpek. Thank you. It was very interesting to see how we can have this combination of both the climate risk we're discussing for now, 4 webinars, and also the point you mentioned, this energy transformation and not only transition. So thank you again. And now we'll have our last panelist, Mrs. Anna Gogoreliani, the permanent representative of the Ministry of Economy and Sustainable Development of Georgia at the NSEC COE, the co-organizer of this series of webinars. She has both a background as a civil servant in the Georgian administration, working for the Ministry of Energy as chief specialist in the analytical department of the ministry, and also a background in business, being consultant to the CEO of the Georgian state electoral system. So, Ms. Gogoreliani, excuse me.
Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for inviting me to this event and for giving me the opportunity to talk about this interesting topic. My professional experience basically is working on the issue of my country's energy security development, and I have been working on the military-related issues only just for about 1 year and a half. And during this period, I had the opportunity to work on the projects regarding the smart energy solution for military application. And let me share my thoughts about this issue with my presentation. Do you see this?
Yeah.
1 minute. Sorry. It's noticeable that since the adoption of Green Defense Framework within NATO in 2014 and emphasizing by it the importance of green defense, many positive changes have occurred for creating green defense that is expressed by the millions of invested money, developed innovative technologies, decreased defense-related greenhouse gas emissions, and so on. Maybe it is caused by other national or international commitments as well, but it emphasizes that importance of unified national visions at the international level, which probably needs some additions or updates as technology is developing rapidly. One of such a separate document might become the NATO concept on operational energy, on which development work is already started within NATO and secretary. Despite the fact that many nations have already developed and implemented green solutions for defense in recent years, the introduction of smart solutions is quite rare and mostly at the pilot level, especially in the military operations. In many countries' cases, despite having the mandatory target regarding emissions, energy efficiency and renewable energy under the EU, such targets are not integrated into the military sector. It is noticeable that countries are avoiding setting such targets for the defense sector in order to avoid decreasing the capacity of forces or invest a large amount of money in reaching a more sustainable defense without decreasing capability. That is quite understandable considering the current combat operation environment is mainly formed according to traditional forward characteristics, and most of the countries' combat capabilities are run on fossil fuel. And you can see with this graph that according to territorial emission data in 2019, NATO member states are responsible for about 20–60% of global carbon emission, which is the main greenhouse gas. Inside NATO, the USA is a main contributor by 56%, but the responsibility of the remaining nation is 44%. The main driver of CO2 emissions growth is technologies, as they are the main consumers of fossil fuel, and for more than a century, the high carbon intensive energy mix has been a source of not only the development of food, but for military capability as well, that influence both climate balance and forces balance over the world. That means that changing energy mix might change the climate situation and the geopolitical situation as well, with which could be the interest of countries' defense forces, I think. Currently, for example, the whole EU member countries' development on imports is about 60%. Among it on crude oil and oil products is 95%, and on gas about 85%. That means that the dependency level of the military capability on external energy sources is quite high, despite the full reserves. Both climate change and energy security issues require technological transformation in the military sector. Almost half of the NATO countries have announced at the political level that their interest to become climate neutral by 2050. Among them, 5 countries have already these targets at a low level. Countries have lots of plans to become greener, but they are avoiding to promise climate neutral defense. In 2020, the UK Ministry of Defense expressed their visions of contributing to countries' target and becoming climate neutral by 2050 by implementing some already developed smart energy solutions and finding other innovative ways that is now it's a this plan is at the initial planning level, and hopefully it will develop for future. In the case of carbon neutral defense, accent I think should be done on widely accessible energy sources to avoid the formation of another radically unbalanced geopolitical situation again in the future. For it, very promising seems renewable sources for civilian and for military application as well. Renewable energy creates the possibility to utilize the free and self-replenishing sources that is available at the point of use and can be built and deployed quickly. And one of the main benefits of it is that it is much safer in the case of attacks more safer than traditional fuel. According to some already introduced technological solutions, it seems to reach a carbon neutral future in case of the wide introduction of such innovative technologies is possible. And one, I will show you some identified technological solutions that were identified during the project I was conducting, and final report of this project will be published soon on the Nato thanks webpage, and everyone can see. It's one of the good solution is smart spaces that are already introduced in the USA, for example. It includes security and life quality solutions and smart energy solutions as well, because of forces development require advanced technological solutions that are basically developed on electric powered basis. There are, for example, I selected several technological solutions to introduce that using such technologies, it's possible to reach more green defense. For example, for first of all, its defense needs smart grid, and for fixed basis, so smart grid is more beneficial, and for mobile basis, mobile smart grid. And both type of system has possibility to integrate renewable sources like solar and wind into the grids and ensure forces resiliency. Another technological solution is control of energy flows. Control can be reached by metering system and also by power management systems, and metering system, as I noticed during this study, almost all of countries has problem to meter energy sources and have accurate data about it. And I think without good data, it will be almost impossible to reach a sustainable defense because you need data to analyze what you already have and what you can do for future, at least for calculation. So this is a power management system. which can has a possibility to manage and prioritize power use for various electronics devices from any available power sources. Also, I think best solution is to use local sources and to use local sources best solution for it. Solar panels, and there is introduced several type of solar panel, and for fixed and deployed renewable plants and hybrid power generation systems is good to utilize free local energy sources, and with it increase independency of sources and flexibility. First picture is just solar panels, and second is hybrid power plant, where is solar panel, wind turbine, and also it uses fossil fuel as a backup source. Also, good solution is smart grid, smart tents with solar panels. Also, utilization of solar energy need advanced storages, and for fixed basis, this big storages is good solution, and with it, it is possible to store energy during peak time and use it when there is a lack of energy. And this small storage is for soldiers, and with it they can operate long period. Also, regarding the consumption side, it seems quite problematic, because when it comes to, for example, this type of technology, which is quite developed in civilian sector, it's easy to adapt and introduce, but when it comes to military technology, it needs quite big amount of investment to develop, because it will not be interest of business. So more accent is on unmanned technology, and there is introduced for aerial unmanned technology and for ground. Both are robotic technology, and first one is use solar energy and battery, and second one is it's hybrid technology and use diesel as well as backup energy source. And another benefit of solar energy is also be more silent and operates more flexible. So I think it's all.
Yeah, so thank you very much for underlining the opportunities, but also the challenges in the development of a dual purpose technology from the military to the civilian, or from the military and the civilian to the military. Now we'll have the concluding remarks for all the webinars by the Major General Étienne Patry, the director of the Joint Center for Concept, Doctrine and Experimentation of the French Minister for the Armed Forces. Major General Patry is having a rich career as an Air Force pilot first, with 17 wartime missions, then as commanding officer in the French Air Force, and also, you know very well, General Nato, because you will also work with Nato both at Joint Forces HQ in Brunswick and at John HQ in Lisbon. I know that nowadays your center is very well aware and very well involved in dealing with climate change issues. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nicolas. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to thank the organization direction, FRS and NSEC Center of Excellence for inviting me to conclude this series of webinars dedicated to wide reflections about climate change and energy security for NATO nations and their armed forces. I'm indeed very glad and honored to share some of the current French thoughts about this subject with you. The topics are not new, not really new, but must now be assessed in its rising strategic dimension. The growing interest of numerous players, national or international, like FRS, NSEC Center of Excellence, EU Commission, European Defence Agency, or IAI, and the high level of participants underlines that the climate change impacts can result in a series of new challenges in terms of security, but also in terms of mastering the footprint of the armed forces. A few days ago, the French forces have also organized a seminar about the very same subject. In the wake of the analysis of new threats and risks highlighted in recent capstone analysis documents. For instance, the Climate Change and Defense Roadmap of the European External Action Service, the incoming NATO Action Plan as a part of the NATO 2030 initiative, which will be approved at the summit in June, and the new shift of US policy, for example. And France has also issued some important policy documents. A renewed Sustainable Development Strategy, the last one was issued in 2016. A new energy strategy, and I would like also to mention the establishment of a Defense and Climate Observatory in 2020. As your debates have shown, climate change has different types of impacts on various domains: politics, society, economy, security, defense. Then can be tackled through two main approaches. The first one concerns the impact on global security, as climate changes can worsen current crises or even trigger new ones. The second approach deals with the need for armed forces to play their part of the common effort for a sustainable development and for reducing their footprint, even if armed forces are the ultimate guarantee of national survival and are therefore derogating from the generally applicable rules of law. Let us dig a little bit more into these two approaches. The first one is probably the most obvious or natural one. Climate change has a significant impact on the defense and security environment. The very first consequence of climate change is a more unpredictable, swift, and damaging meteorological events, such as storms with incredible wind speed or typhoon with huge amounts of rainfalls. This is to say, heavy humanitarian disasters requiring more frequent armed forces interventions, mobilizing large-scale equipment. It's a key challenge for both the development of skills and the availability objectives of the military capabilities, and probably also in developing more engineer skills. Adequate and harmonized coordination with civilian emergency response will, of course, be necessary, as it will get more and more a crucial factor in addressing crises. The second one is about the highly demanding and harder environment in which our armed forces will have to deploy. As of now, many fluctuant parameters have to be taken into account in our operational planning, but also in the design of our future military equipment. Sandstorm, flooded area, on the contrary, rare water access, more meteorological threats for the aircraft like hail or thunderbolt, for example. As an aviator, as an airman, I remember well the unforeseen storm in 2017 in Jamena, during which 2 of our transport aircrafts have been seriously damaged. The third consequence wraps up very important climate change-induced phenomena: desertification or flooding, difficult access to critical resources like water in poverty-stricken area, sea level rise, etc. It is likely to cause uncontrolled immigration and population relocation, which is a risk for stability and security, especially in the Mediterranean area. Last but not least, the fourth consequence could be the breakdown of the overall security situation, fueled by fierce competition between states. In particular, the scarcity of natural resources and the more facilitated conditions on mining exploration in polar region could trigger aggressive stance. However, as I already told you, armed forces are also involved in the global drive to reduce their impact on the environment by limiting the emission of greenhouse gases. By the way, or anyway, the need to replace fossil fuels, or at least to save these resources as they become scarce, is consistent with this approach. The difficulty lies in adapting or designing military capabilities without degrading their overall operating performance. This requirement concerns both the military activities, mainly the training, and also the design of equipment. In this approach, I have identified 4 different contributions as well. The first one, of course, is the need to reduce fossil fuel consumption by developing hybrid engines, even for tactical vehicles, if possible. For instance, France is now in the process to design such a new vehicle called E-Griffon. Biofuel is also a research axis. By the way, even if nuclear propulsion has some well-known drawbacks, it has a valuable contribution to decarbonization. This has already become a reality with the French nuclear-powered vessels, like carrier or submarine. The second one is to accompany the development of national alternative and renewable forms of energy sources. For example, conducting studies to allow the installation of wind farms under the military lower airspace, or to promote the photovoltaic energy by making armed forces spaces available for that purpose. The third one is to develop the eco-design of military assets. This is to say, taking into account ecological criteria at the very beginning of the equipment design and during all its span of life. For that particular purpose, the French procurement agency has developed a systemic process. However, the guarantee and operational performance remains at the heart of this innovative process. The fourth and last contribution is to build military infrastructure that consumes as low energy as reasonably achievable, while making them more resilient to climate change consequences. This topic concerns military means dedicated to force protection, but also barracks, air bases, military ports, and staff building located in metropolitan France. I would like to stress the French project called EcoCamp, which will be a deployable camp, energetically autonomous, reducing also the need for line of supply. Indeed, there is also opportunities, not only constraints. These few considerations underline the need for the armed forces to address, as for now, the consequences of climate changes. This is a major responsibility of military staff. A global approach is necessary and even essential, but a fair burden sharing must be found. Innovation has also to be stimulated, and bold choices will have to be done. Basically, the ecological transition is also an opportunity. It leads us to think, design, and operate differently, in accordance with acceptance criteria defined by civil society. But in this process, the operational purpose of armed forces must never be lost of sight. It must remain the guiding principle. I thank you for your attention and thank you for all your discussions.
Thank you, Mon Général. Thank you for gathering the elements of these 4 different webinars in terms of doctrine, strategy, innovation, challenges in NATO territories and abroad. Now I will pass the floor to Lieutenant Colonel Christophe Nave, the Deputy Director of NSEC COE, for a few concluding words on the behalf of NSEC COE. Christophe, please.
Thank you, Nicolas. Do you hear me well? Thanks. Mes respects, Mon Général. So like most of you, I attended all 4 conferences. And personally, I can say that I was very interested, particularly impressed by the diversity of knowledge and perspective of all panelists. They were thus able to give, I think, a general and complete vision on this complex and important subject. So I hope also that these conferences have helped to make you aware of the nexus between climate change, energy security, and defense forces, and that have given you a vision of the future of this problem. So to conclude this cycle, on the behalf of the NATO NSEC COE, what to say? In fact, I would like to develop shortly 2 points raised during all these conferences. The first one is related to NATO, and the second one is related to our Energy Security Center of Excellence. About NATO, it has been said several times that climate change is a threat multiplier that will engender many plagues for humanity. No nation will be spared. It is a global threat to our future, and it must be addressed now or we will lose the fight against these threats. It is why I am really convinced that our alliance is one of the best organizations to deal with climate change. Climate change is a global threat, and NATO is the alliance of 30 great nations with the legitimacy to act almost everywhere in the world. Climate change will lead to disasters, and as Mr. Wales has underlined, NATO is the organization with the most important capacities, the most sophisticated technical means, and an immediate military availability. It is why I have been happy to hear the opening address from Mr. Weel announcing the integration of this threat into the NATO strategy and plans. Secondly, about our center, what can we do? So, as we have said, climate change will also increase competition for energy sources. And here, I see a role for our center. First, to assess NATO's energy security, in particular, its operational energy security, but also to identify new technologies that could make our operations less dependent on the fossil fuel supply chain or the host nation's electricity grid to make them more resilient. Finally, my last word will be for you, Nicolas, and also for Mrs. Inga Puikevska, our Latvian expert in charge of this topic for our center. I sincerely thank you both to have organized this very well done webinar. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Christophe. I will not conclude the conclusion, but
you can.
just to jump on your words, I would just like to thank, first of all the panelists, all the keynote speakers for the whole webinars that share with us all their knowledge about these very interesting topics, but also to thank deeply all the people that were involved in the design and in also the participation to these webinars, for the FRS, Mona Bignollet and Fabien Herbert that supported, and also Gaspard that supported the whole communication and IT system, for the NSEC COE, you, Christophe, Colonel Petkevicius, Inga, of course, but also Arturas Petkas that was with me at the origin of the series of webinars, but also our partners, the EI, in Rome with Margherita Bianchi and Luca Franza, the European Commission with Rémi Maillet and Claudia Canevari, and last but not the least, the EDA with Konstantinos Hadjisavvas and Yanis Chatsalexandris. All of these people were involved in creating this event, and nothing would have been possible without them. So thank you again, dear participants, dear panelists, and dear organizers. So in a few days, you can have the podcast of this session and all of other sessions on the dedicated website of the conference. So do not hesitate to look at all the debates and all the discussion we had during more than 1 month now. Thank you again, and goodbye, and see you in another conference.